GPS tracker caught cheating ex at affair partner's house. Appeared miserable weeks after breakup. Have you ever felt the sting of betrayal from someone you trusted the most? I never imagined it would happen to me. For months, my ex-wife acted distant, and I brushed it off, thinking it was just the stresses of life. But deep down, I had this nagging feeling something wasn't right. I never expected that a small device would end up revealing the shocking truth. My wife had been cheating on me, and I had the evidence right in front of me. It all came to light when I tracked her every move with a GPS device. What I discovered would leave me questioning everything about our marriage. She wasn't just with someone else, but when I confronted her, I saw a side of her I never knew existed. This is the story of how I uncovered the affair and how my ex appeared more miserable than I ever thought possible after the breakup. When I first met Jennifer, I felt as if I had stumbled upon something rare, something perfect. We were in college when we crossed paths, both of us studying for our future careers, both eager to find someone to share our lives with. Our relationship blossomed quickly, and after a few years of dating, I proposed. We got married in what seemed like a fairy tale ceremony, surrounded by family and friends. From the outside, we looked like the ideal couple, one that everyone admired. Our shared dreams, the long nights talking about our future, and even the small, simple moments at home made me feel like I had found my soulmate. But as time passed, things began to change in ways I couldn't fully understand. It wasn't sudden, but a slow, unsettling shift that made me question everything I thought I knew about our relationship. The first cracks in our marriage were small, so small I could have easily ignored them. I thought I was being paranoid when I noticed she'd begin staying late at work more often, or when she'd insist on going out with her friends after work, even when there was no special occasion. It felt like something was off, but I convinced myself it was just her being more independent, and maybe I was just too sensitive. I'd seen the signs in other relationships, small gestures that indicated things weren't perfect, but I refused to believe it could happen to us. I loved her deeply, and I trusted her completely. After all, she was my best friend. The person I planned on growing old with. The person I believed had my back through everything. But slowly, the small things started to pile up. I found myself asking questions I never thought I would have to ask. Why is she so distant? Why is she always on her phone? And worst of all, is there someone else? The tension in our marriage was something I couldn't ignore, even if I wanted to. The late nights became more frequent, and soon it wasn't just about staying late at work. She was spending weekends away, and I was left alone at home more often than I cared to admit. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, that she just needed time for herself or that she was stressed with work. But the moments of distance became too obvious to overlook. She'd be on her phone constantly, even during dinner, a time we used to cherish together. When I asked about it, she would quickly hide the phone or change the subject. At first, I brushed it off as her being preoccupied with work or friends, but it became more and more frequent. There was something in the way she acted that made me question everything I thought I knew. One evening, I came home early from a work trip. As I entered the house, I noticed the car wasn't in the driveway, which was odd since Jennifer was supposed to be home. When she arrived, she acted strangely, avoiding eye contact and not answering my questions directly. I felt that something wasn't right. I tried to tell myself that I was just imagining things, but the suspicion gnawed at me. A few days later, I decided to take a closer look at her phone while she was in the shower. I knew it was a violation of trust, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. It was then that I discovered the texts, the messages that would change everything. The first message caught me off guard. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I miss you so much." I froze, staring at the phone screen as the realization began to sink in. Those words were not meant for me. They weren't something I'd ever received. My stomach twisted into knots. I didn't want to believe it, but there it was, proof. My wife, Jennifer, had been hiding something from me. Something big. I opened the conversation thread, and my heart pounded with each swipe of my finger, each new line of text I uncovered. It wasn't just one message or a few flirty exchanges, it was entire conversations that painted a picture I wasn't prepared for. The texts were intimate, more intimate than anything she'd ever shared with me in recent months. They spoke of secret meetups, longing glances, and late-night rendezvous that I hadn't been a part of. They spoke of a life she'd been leading in parallel to the one we'd shared. And all this time, I had been oblivious. I had been telling myself that things were fine, that the distance between us was just a phase, but this was something else entirely. There was no denying it. As I scrolled further, my stomach churned. Picture after picture filled the screen. Photos of her and someone else. The man in these photos was someone I had never seen before. He wasn't a friend, wasn't a coworker, wasn't anyone I'd ever been introduced to. Yet, there they were, smiling, laughing, looking so comfortable with each other. In some pictures, they were out at restaurants. In others, they were at his place. His living room, his bed, his life that I had never known. They'd been meeting for months, living a secret life that I had no part in. I felt like I was suffocating. The breath in my lungs was thick and labored. My mind couldn't process it all. How had this happened? How had Jennifer, the woman I trusted more than anyone, the woman I had shared my life with, my dreams with, how had she been hiding this? The woman who promised me forever was now someone I didn't recognize. It wasn't just the physical betrayal, though that in itself was painful enough, it was the emotional betrayal. She had shared her heart with someone else. She had been telling him things she had never told me. There was a bond between them, something that went far beyond physical attraction. She had opened herself up to him in ways she never had with me. The thought of it made my chest tighten, a mix of hurt and anger building inside me. I stared at the phone, each message now like a hammer striking me over and over again. The text messages from Jennifer were full of affection, promises of future plans, expressions of desire, and longing. All things that should have been mine to hear, mine to share. But now, they were being shared with someone else. And the worst part was, Jennifer had made it clear that she had been fully aware of what she was doing. There was no confusion, no misunderstanding. She had made a choice to cheat, a choice to betray the vows we had made. I could feel the weight of the betrayal in my bones. It was unbearable. I couldn't escape the feeling that my entire world had been shattered in that instant. Every memory we shared together now felt like a lie. The vacations, the anniversaries, the moments we spent laughing and loving, they were all tainted. Each one was a facade, a carefully crafted performance to hide the truth. The truth that she had been deceiving me for months, perhaps even longer. And then, something hit me, a cold realization that I had been living in denial. How had I not seen the signs before? Had I been too blind? Had I ignored the little things that didn't add up? I thought back to the times when Jennifer had seemed distant, when she was always busy, or working late, or needing time for herself. I had dismissed it, telling myself it was just stress, that she was tired, that it was just a phase. Now, I saw it for what it really was, her excuse for sneaking around, for living a double life. I felt a wave of anger rush through me, followed by a crushing sense of sadness. I had been loyal, faithful, and trusting. And this was how it had ended. I had been a fool. But what hurt the most wasn't just the infidelity, it was the realization that Jennifer had never intended to tell me the truth. She had never planned to come clean. If I hadn't found those texts, she might have kept on lying, kept on living her double life. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking in everything that had just hit me. I had been living a lie. My life with Jennifer, the life I had built with her, was nothing more than an illusion. The woman I thought I knew and loved had betrayed me in the worst way possible. And the worst part? I had no idea how deep it went, how long it had been happening, or how many more lies there were to uncover. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I couldn't stay in the dark any longer. I had to take control of my life, of my future. Jennifer had taken something from me, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The time for confrontation had come. The days that followed were a blur of emotions, anger, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. I had the evidence. I had the proof. But what was I supposed to do with it? Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to throw it all in her face, to demand answers. But the other part of me, the part that still wanted to believe in her, wanted to wait, to hear her side, to see if she would confess on her own. But she never did. She carried on as if nothing had changed, as if everything was fine between us. She continued with her usual routine, her usual acts, as if she hadn't just shattered everything I believed in. The realization hit me like a slap in the face. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't ashamed. She had no remorse for what she had done. The woman I had once trusted, the woman I thought I could rely on, was a stranger now. The night I finally confronted her was one I'll never forget. It started like any other evening. Dinner, small talk, the typical banter we'd been going through for weeks now. But this time, the air between us was thick with tension. I could feel it building inside me, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface, threatening to spill over. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I placed my phone on the table in front of her and slid it towards her. Her eyes flickered for just a moment, brief, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. She knew exactly what was coming. There was no more pretending. No more avoiding the truth. I let the silence stretch for what felt like an eternity, watching her as she avoided looking at the phone. Then slowly she reached for it. Her fingers hesitated for just a moment before she opened the messages. The silence in the room was deafening. I watched as her face changed. First, it was confusion, then realization, and finally, the guilt I had hoped to see from the start, though it was fleeting. Her expression faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. She put the phone down and met my eyes. "I can explain," she said, her voice steady, almost too steady. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. How could she explain away what I had just uncovered? How could she possibly justify months, maybe even years, of lying to me, of betraying everything we had built together? But I didn't interrupt. I needed to hear it from her, to hear her excuses. I needed her to finally admit the truth out loud. But her explanation didn't make sense. She said it was just a phase, that she had been feeling neglected, that she needed attention, excitement, and that the affair had been a way for her to get validation. She claimed she hadn't meant for it to go this far, that she still loved me, but she didn't know how to fix things between us. Her words felt hollow, and every excuse she gave only dug a deeper hole. She was justifying her actions, making it seem like she was the victim in this situation. I was lonely, she said, her voice breaking, but her eyes never showed any real emotion. I made a mistake, a huge mistake, but it was never about you. You're my family, you're the one I'm supposed to love. It was all a lie. I could hear the desperation in her voice, but it wasn't the desperation of someone who truly regretted their actions, it was the desperation of someone trying to cover their tracks. She wasn't sorry for what she had done, she was sorry she'd gotten caught. I sat there, staring at her, trying to process everything she had just said. My mind was racing. How could she say all of that with a straight face? How could she act like none of this was her fault? The words she had spoken seemed so rehearsed, like they were meant to manipulate me into forgiving her. But I wasn't going to fall for it. I had already made up my mind. This was the moment I realized I had been living in denial. I had been holding on to a relationship that wasn't real. I had been clinging to the idea of a marriage that had crumbled long before I even knew it. I had been fooling myself into thinking things would get better, that we could fix it, but this was the harsh reality. I'm done, Jennifer, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I can't do this anymore. I can't pretend that everything's fine when you've been living a lie. Her face fell. The guilt was now obvious, but it was too late. She had lost me. All of the promises, all of the apologies in the world couldn't take back the pain she had caused, couldn't undo the betrayal she had inflicted on me. She begged, of course. She begged me to stay, to give her another chance. But I had already made my decision. The trust was gone. The love I had once felt for her had been replaced by anger and disappointment. There was no coming back from this. I will move on, I said, more to myself than to her. I deserve better than this. The conversation ended there. I could see it in her eyes. She had no idea what she had just lost. She thought she could get away with it, but now she was the one left empty-handed. After that night, when the truth had finally been laid bare, I found myself standing on the precipice of an uncertain future. The weight of the decision to let go of a relationship that had once defined so much of my life pressed down on me. The house that we had built together now felt like an empty shell, a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. It was strange. At first, there was a sense of relief, but it quickly gave way to a lingering ache. I wasn't just grieving the loss of my marriage, I was mourning the person I had become in that relationship, the man who had believed in her lies, who had put her needs before his own for far too long. The days that followed were some of the hardest I had ever faced. I had to navigate the silence in a house that used to be filled with laughter and conversation. The walls felt cold, and every corner seemed to hold memories of a past I no longer wanted to be a part of. But as time passed, something inside of me began to shift. The pain I felt began to transform into strength. I was no longer shackled by the lies, no longer bound to someone who had betrayed me without remorse. I had the freedom to choose my path, to rebuild my life. Jennifer did not make it easy. She bombarded me with messages, phone calls, and even showed up unannounced at my doorstep. She tried everything she could to make me second-guess my decision, hoping to pull me back into the toxic cycle we had been trapped in. At first, I was tempted to listen, to let her back in, because I was so used to making her needs my priority. But each time she reached out, something inside me grew stronger. I remembered the pain of betrayal, the heartbreak of realizing the person I had trusted most had torn my world apart. The first few days after the breakup were the hardest. I could not help but wonder what went wrong, replaying the past in my mind over and over. I questioned myself, asking if I had somehow missed the signs, if I had done something to deserve the betrayal. But slowly, I started to realize that her actions had nothing to do with me. They were a reflection of her choices, her inability to be honest, and her disregard for the trust we had built. It was not my fault that she had chosen to be unfaithful. I had not failed her, she had failed me. One of the most difficult parts of the aftermath was the loneliness. I had become so accustomed to having Jennifer by my side that being alone felt like a foreign concept. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to appreciate the peace that came with solitude. I started to rediscover parts of myself that had been lost over the years. I began to do things for me, things I had once enjoyed but had abandoned in the pursuit of keeping the peace in our marriage. I took up old hobbies, reconnected with friends I had neglected, and slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. Jennifer's attempts to reach out were relentless. She sent flowers, wrote long, tearful letters, and even tried to guilt me into taking her back by reminding me of all the good times we had shared. But I knew better now. I saw through her attempts to manipulate me. She had hurt me in a way that could never be undone, and no amount of flowers or sweet words could erase the pain she had caused. I had learned that I deserved more than empty promises and half-hearted apologies. Then, just when I thought I could finally move on, Jennifer made one last attempt. She showed up at my apartment, uninvited, with a plea for us to start over. She admitted that she had made a terrible mistake, that she regretted everything, and that she was willing to do anything to win me back. Her words were sincere, but there was something about her that seemed different, desperate, almost. She was no longer the woman I had fallen in love with. She was someone who had lost everything, and in that moment, I could see it in her eyes. She realized that she had ruined something beautiful. But even as I watched her stand there, pleading for another chance, I knew deep down that I could never go back. The trust was gone, the foundation had crumbled, and there was no rebuilding what we had. I had changed. I had grown. I was no longer the man who had been willing to accept less than he deserved. And so, I stood firm in my decision. I told Jennifer that I was moving on, that it was too late for us, and that I was no longer interested in rekindling the relationship. It was painful, but it was also empowering. I was finally in control of my own life. I had taken back the power that I had allowed her to take from me. And as I walked away from that moment, I felt a sense of liberation like I had never felt before. Over the next few months, I focused on healing. I took the time to rediscover who I was outside of my relationship. I learned to love myself again. And it wasn't long before I met someone new. It wasn't a rebound, and it wasn't something I had been looking for, but it felt right. She was different from Jennifer, not perfect, but real, supportive, and kind. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was with someone who genuinely cared for me, not for what I could give them or the image I presented. As I spent more time with her, I began to see how much I had been missing. The warmth, the connection, the feeling of being truly valued for who I was, it was all so new, and it felt so right. I began to realize that the pain I had gone through was not in vain. It had led me to a place where I could finally be happy again. As for Jennifer, she slowly faded from my life. She tried a few more times to reach out, to apologize, to offer explanations, but I had moved on. The past was no longer my burden to carry. I had forgiven her, but forgiveness didn't mean I had to go back to her. I had learned that some mistakes are simply too big to overlook, and that there is no place for betrayal in a healthy relationship. And so, I stood tall, knowing that I had taken control of my life once more. I had survived the storm, and now I was ready for the sunshine. What had once felt like the end of everything was now the beginning of something much more beautiful. A new chapter, full of promise, hope, and the possibility of real love. If you found this story impactful, make sure to hit that like button to show your support. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more real-life stories like this one.